All right, it's just gone hot. Very echoing. Hold on a sec. There we go. Sorry, I have two devices open. One to watch the chat in case anyone joins, and one to project and teach from. So no one is here yet. So far this is a recording. So let me hop over to my presentation. Okay, so welcome. If you're watching this, you are likely preparing to write the Dean's exam for PSYC7321, Cognitive Psychology. So what we are offering is 2 sessions, tonight and then tomorrow night as well. So that's Wednesday, Thursday. The sessions are going to be different each night, so it's not a repeat. So tomorrow night's not a repeat of tonight, it's a follow-on. So if you are watching this as a recording, it's best to obviously watch this one and then the next one. It would be great to try and attend both, but I know that life is busy. So if you can't attend both, try to watch both if you can. Both the sessions will be recorded, obviously. And just so that you are aware of the purpose of these sessions, it's only 2 sessions, it's only 2 hours. You're already familiar with how complex and dense this module is in terms of theory. So it is not possible or it's not realistic to try and aim to reteach anything in these 2 evenings. Okay. Very, very happy for you to send through questions. You can even just pop them into the chat, even if it's not right now, if it's between sessions, if you're watching this, I don't know, Thursday morning, that's also fine. Pop it into the chat. I will see the message and then I can help you there. If anything is confusing you. But what I am going to focus on, let me minimize that. You may remember from previous sittings that you've written for this module that the exam is structured with fairly long questions for like 20, 30 marks. They've got heavy weightings and there's a lot that goes into each question. So I'm going to spend a bit of time focusing on how to unpack and break down the question and the verb attached to that question so that you can figure out exactly what it is the question is actually asking you to do. Because if you can break down a 30-mark question into little chunks of 5 or 10 marks here and there, it's going to make your life a lot easier when you're trying to answer the question. So we're going to make those implicit instructions a bit more explicit. We'll go through a paper from 2025, the very first sitting, and hopefully that will give you a little bit more understanding of what the questions are looking for in relation to the answers. So we will look at the past papers with their mark breakdowns. And then at the end of this session, I'm going to talk about some study strategies that I recommend for this particular exam. So I think that different psych modules require different study strategies, and that depends on the content. And so if this was a research psych booster session or developmental psych, I would give you different hints and tips. But having a look at the exams that have been given in 2025 and 2024, looking at the content heaviness of the module, I'm going to recommend that we tackle it in a particular way. I just quickly want to check that my mic, yes, okay, my mic is on. All right. For a moment, I thought I hadn't turned it on. Okay. So I'll give you some study strategies, and I'm going to teach you also how to use AI. You've only got just over a week to prepare for this exam. I don't know how long ago you were engaged with this module, and so let's work smarter, not harder. And I'm going to teach you what I would do if I was a student about to write the Dean's exam here. I'm going to teach you what I would do here. Okay. And then tomorrow night, we're going to go through, it's a recap quiz with some key sections that are likely to come up in the exam. And the purpose of that is for you to be able to see, oh, okay, I got these questions wrong. Those questions were all related to memory or perception or the history of cognitive psychology. You should be able to identify your own learning gaps from that quiz. There'll be 20 questions, and we're going to go through each question as well. I'm going to explain why the answers are what they are. And that's just to help with a little bit of a revision of content knowledge without me teaching it to you, because there just simply isn't time to teach it in an hour. But again, it's mostly for you to identify your learning gaps so that you know where to go from here and what to focus your time on. Okay, so let's have a look at a past paper. This is the very first paper that was written in 2025. And now the papers mostly follow this kind of a structure. And so it's a good idea to look at this past paper, because it's the paper you are going to write is likely to follow the same structure. Okay, so this is the entirety of the paper, only 4 questions. Question 1 in totality, 50 marks. Question 2 in totality is 50 marks. Sorry, I cut out the mark allocation for the top of question 1. So we've got a question on, let me move this thing. We've got a question on the perception of objects with reference to Helmholtz's theory of unconscious inference and the Gestalt principles of organization, and you have to provide examples to illustrate your answer. So a lot that's required of you within one question that will give you 30 marks. So of course, it's really important for this kind of an exam to really have a good understanding of where these 30 marks are coming from. Because if you misunderstand the question, that's not 5, 7, 8, 10 marks you're losing. That's 30 marks that you could lose. And that's a bulk of the exam. So that's really what we're going to focus on tonight, is the breakdown of those marks and how to read these questions. Okay, then question 1.2 was discuss how humans understand words with reference to the word frequency effect. And then you have to refer to relevant research studies and your answer. Question 2 talks about how objects are placed into categories with reference to 2 approaches, the definitional approach and the prototype approach. Loads of theory. Can you see that? This is a theory exam. There's very little application really here. So that gives you an idea of the kind of studying you need to do. And I'm going to talk back to this when we get to the end, and I talk to specific study strategies that I'm going to recommend. And then the last question here was discuss the history of cognitive psychology in terms of the following: Dunder's reaction time experiment, Ebbinghaus's memory experiment. So looking at this exam as a snapshot, this is pure theory. So that gives you an indication of the kind of studying you need to be doing. I see each of these questions as a mind map. That's how I would learn this. You might be a more linear learner and you might like your lists. I like mind maps to see how things work together, especially for cognitive psychology, but you must do what works for you. But what I think we can agree on is this is heavily theoretical. So you need to be making several pages of notes. Try to anticipate what chunks of information belong together, just like this. Okay, like let's look at question 2.2. This question is all about the history of cognitive psychology. Okay, so that's from Learning Unit 1. Looking at the reaction time experiment and the memory experiment. That is a chunk of knowledge, a chunk of content that belongs together. So when you are making your notes for this exam, try to chunk content together. Okay. If you're struggling to figure out what content should be chunked together, use your ARC resources because the learning units on ARC are pre-chunked. So the separate pages that are underneath each of the learning units have already been chunked. So there's a good clue as to how things should be structured in terms of breaking down the learning unit into studyable chunks. Okay. So what we're going to do in a moment is go through each of these questions and break it down. But before we do that, you can see I've highlighted particular words in this question paper. And this is something that's really important for you to look for carefully, especially in long answer questions for 30 marks, 20 marks, 50 marks, however much it is. So you can see here in the things that I've highlighted in yellow, we have 3 questions that are asking you to discuss one thing or the other, and 1 question that's asking you to explain something. Now, this is really important because these are different tasks that are being asked of you. So let's have a look at what is the difference between discuss and explain? And of course, there's also a difference if you see a question that says describe or analyze or critically examine. It's asking you to do something slightly different with each of those verbs. So it is really worth familiarizing yourself what each of those things are asking of you. And you don't have to look too far to find out what discuss or explain or critically examine or analyze is asking of you. You can ask ChatGPT, Google it. I Googled what does discuss mean in an exam, and this is what Google told me. Google now gives you an AI summary at the top, so I obviously had a look at it, read through it, and I thought, yes, 100% agree. This is a wonderful description of what a discuss question is requiring of you. So if you are asked to discuss anything, it doesn't matter what comes after discuss, there's a couple of things that are going to be required of you, and these are the things that you're going to get marks for. So typically what is looked for in a discuss question is a balanced argument. So you're usually asked to discuss something if there are 2 sides to an issue, especially if those 2 sides are opposing views. Okay, not always, but if there are 2 opposing views, it is your job to show a comprehensive understanding of both views and balance those arguments. Okay, it's not asking you to argue for a particular position. That's a different verb category altogether. It's asking you to present both sides of the story. Sometimes it's positioning 2 theories against each other, and sometimes the theories have a slight dissonance between them. And so your job is to make that dissonance explicit and then to find some sort of a middle ground. So it also requires an in-depth analysis. You are moving beyond mere description or explanation. If the examiner is looking for a description or an explanation, they will ask you to describe or explain something. So if they're asking you to discuss something, they are looking for a much more in-depth analysis. They want you to debate a topic, examine its implications, talk about it in a real-world setting. And that is why often in discuss questions, you will see them asking for examples, because that's a very clean way of making an in-depth analysis and moving beyond a theoretical description or explanation. So another thing to remember in your discuss question is that it should be evidence-based, which means that whatever you say should be supported with evidence or facts, like from a particular experiment or a particular study that you've read. So when you are making your mind map, If you suspect it's going to be a discuss question, which as we see in this exam, most of them have been, okay? So prepare for a discuss question by listing some evidence against each theory. For example, that was evidenced in a particular study that was done or an experiment. Sometimes even an example, and some examples you could just make up. And I'm sure that you are provided with many examples in lectures. So when you are revising, don't skim over the example part of the slide or the notes or the recording. Those examples could help you in increasing your marks in a discuss question. Then in a discuss question, you also want to make sure, even if it's one sentence, to conclude what you were saying. Remember that your conclusion sentence is let's say it's a 30-mark question. Think about how much you have to write for a 30-mark question. In a handwritten exam, I would imagine that's a good page and a half, maybe, depending how big your handwriting is. The very last thing that your examiner reads is your conclusion. And it's not a whole conclusion paragraph, okay? Because it's not an essay. It's a discuss question. 1 or 2 sentences to sum up what it is that you have argued in this question. So you conclude by summarizing the arguments and providing a final verdict or an overall position if you are asked for that. Remember, that's the last thing your examiner reads, so make it count. Because when they finish reading that sentence, at that point, they're going to decide what your mark is out of 30 or 20 or whatever it is. So that is a sentence you really want to make count. Try not to repeat yourself. Try not to be vague. Be clear. Do a Dr. Seuss. Okay, Dr. Seuss says, "Say what you mean what you say," and that's key for a conclusion. Quite often in discussions, we see keywords like however, or therefore, or in contrast, or consequently. These help to structure your logical argument in a discuss question. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for explain questions. We saw one of those in that paper. So just give me one moment. I just want to check if anyone is logged on. No, not yet. Okay. So in an explain question, explain is also heavily theoretical, but requires different tasks of you than a discuss question. Okay. So in an explain question, we are looking for you to give reasons for things. So focus on the underlying causes and mechanisms of things, especially in cognitive psychology. There's always an underlying biological mechanism to all of these things that you've studied. So go beyond the mere description. Again, if we wanted you to just describe something, we would say, describe X, Y, Z. But if we're asking you to explain, remember, explain means why, okay? If your mom says to you, explain to me why you came home so late last night, she doesn't want you to describe what time you got home and whose car you came home in. He wants to know why you came home so late, okay? So it's the underlying causes and mechanisms. Then we have cause and effect. So you want to, in your answer, to connect ideas logically to show relationships. For example, how one event leads to another. Particularly in cognitive psychology, how a biological mechanism may lead to a behavioral outcome. Detail and clarity. Provide a thorough step-by-step explanation to make the topic clear in order. And that's what's nice about cognitive psych. Often these things do happen in a particular order. And if they don't, make sure that you are as clear as you can be. Unless you are asked to list something, if you know something exists in a list, but you are asked to explain it. Don't just list the things. Explain what each of those things in the list means. Okay, so go beyond description. So if you were asked to describe something, when you are asked to describe something, you are saying what that thing is. But if you are explaining something, you are explaining why it is that way. Okay, so if you are asked a question about describe Broca's aphasia, okay, if you're describing Broca's aphasia, you are explaining to the examiner what Broca's aphasia is, probably quite symptomatically, okay? If you are asked to explain Broca's aphasia, we want to know, okay, but explain the symptomology, but also explain why Broca's aphasia happens in that way. What are the biological mechanisms behind that? And what makes your answers really strong is using evidence, very much like you would for a discuss question. So in both, use evidence. When in doubt, cite the evidence. Incorporate relevant examples, especially if the question asks you to. Because if it explicitly makes reference to examples and you don't include examples, you can bank on losing quite a few marks. So make sure that you pay very close attention to what is required there. Beyond examples, you can talk to particular facts or theories or studies or experiments to support your point. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at each question in this exam paper in a bit more detail, one by one. And the point of this is not to revise Helmholtz's theory of unconscious inference or Gestalt principles. Tonight, I'm not talking to the theory. I'm not teaching content. Tonight, what I'm doing is helping you learn how to unpack these questions, because it's difficult sometimes to know how to make up your 30 marks. Okay, obviously, there's content related to it, but that you can go straight to the textbook to look for. So I'm not going to teach you something that you can go straight to the textbook for. Of course, if you go to the textbook and you think, sure, this still doesn't make sense, please pop it in the chat at any point and I will help you with those questions. Even if it's later on, okay, it doesn't have to be during the sessions. I will still see the chat and I will still respond to you. But I want you to learn the skill of unpacking these questions, because a lot of the time, that is the reason students fail. It's not because you didn't know Helmholtz's theory of unconscious inference or guessed. You probably did know that, but maybe you lost marks because of the way that you answered the question. Okay. So, and of course, you're not going to see this paper again. You would write a different paper. And so please don't rely on this recording alone to study. You still need to go to the content to study. This recording is simply how to unpack these questions and some study skills that would serve you well here too. Okay. So have a quick read of that whole question. Discuss. There's our discuss. Okay, so ready? You should know in your mind that there's particular things that this question is going to require of you. The topic of this question is perception of objects. Okay, so you might then be triggered to remember a mind map that you made, or a podcast that you made, or a recap quiz that you did with AI about perception of objects. Okay, so your mind immediately goes to where you revised perception of objects. Now, what am I going to give you marks for? You're not going to simply write down everything you know about perception. Okay? Look where the question is directing you. I'm only going to give you marks if you talk about perception in relation to the theory of unconscious inference and Gestalt principles of organization. Okay, there's my 2 focus points for my essay. Not really an essay, it's a short question. And there it is. Provide examples to illustrate your answers. So I can break this down. I'm going to work backwards. I've got 30 marks to work with here. I've got to do a couple of things. I know that I have to talk about this theory. I have to talk about this theory. And I have to give examples. there's a good chance, okay, so I got 3 things. 30 divided by 3, 10 marks is going to go there, 10 marks is going to go there, 10 marks to my examples. So if I forget to give examples, I'm losing a whole 10 marks. Okay. And it is much easier to break it down into small little 10-mark chunks than it is to think, oh, okay, I've got to say enough stuff for 30 marks. So let me write down everything I know about perception. That's a bad way to approach these questions. And let me show you why. Because in the marking memo, these are the instructions given to the markers. For that mark, you get marks for theoretical content. There it is, 20 marks. See, I told you. Let's go back. 10 marks for this theory, 10 marks for that theory. Okay, comes to 20 marks. And then 10 marks for your practical examples. So you would get very few marks for theoretical content if you don't talk about the correct theory. So if you just happen to write down everything that you know about perception of objects and you're not actually talking to a particular theory, you're not going to get more than 9 marks. Okay, that's not even a pass for that question. You need to be able to correctly talk about the theory. And if it's for 10 marks, as a marker, I would maybe be looking for 5 to 8 accurate things about 5 to 8 accurate statements in that theory to discuss perception specifically. So don't just write down random facts about the theory like it was developed in 1852. That doesn't help me to understand perception. Okay. So it must be relevant and it must be correctly described with no errors to get full marks. When you give your examples, they must be practical examples. Okay, so try to leave out the theoretical examples. Talk about a real life situation, a real life thing that a human could go through to illustrate the point that you're trying to make. Okay, and your lecturer would have spoken about several examples throughout the semester. And so when you are revising and making your notes, making your mind maps, make sure that you put some examples down so that when you sit in the exam venue, you're not having to think too hard about an example. You've already got one in the bank, ready and waiting to be applied. Okay, the content for this, let me just move this across. Like I said, I'm not going to go and teach you these theories and gestalts and all of that. We don't have time for that. But that theory, so if you think, oh gosh, I would have managed this question because I don't know those theories, this is a good clue to you. It's Learning Unit 2, Theme 1. They're the pages in your textbook. Okay, I'll just pop those in there. So if any of these questions make you panic, you think, okay, that's where I'm going to go. Okay, let's look at the next question, 1.2. Again, we have a discuss question. Discuss. What's our topic here? What is our focal point? How humans understand words. Okay, so if I'm making a mind map, that's like my middle bubble. How humans understand words. An offshoot of that is going to be the word frequency effect. There's my nice theory, okay, that I can easily summarize in a mind map. Remember, in a discuss question, you need evidence. And luckily, your examiner here has reminded you of that by saying that you must refer to relevant research studies. There's your evidence. Okay, 20 marks here. So let's look at how the mark allocation was broken down for this question. Again, this has come from the marking memo. This is how the examiner was marking it. 15 marks were for the theory. So remember the entire mark allocation was 20 marks. So 15 of those marks was for the theory and 5 marks were allocated for relevant research studies. Okay, again, look, if you simply write down everything that you can remember about that theory, without a clear understanding that I need to use this theory in order to tell the examiner how humans understand words. If you just word vomit all over the page, you're not going to get very good marks. Okay. It must be correctly executed in terms of how you explain things. And if there is disagreement about the theory, or some people have noted limitations about that theory, remember, in a discuss question, it's a balanced argument, it's a balanced account. And so if there are limitations to that theory, it's a really, really good idea to include that here. Okay, for your full marks for a discuss question. Again, if you read that question, you thought, I definitely missed that live session, or I didn't study that in the previous iteration, then you go straight to Learning Unit 6, Theme 2, and there's the page numbers in your textbook. Okay, so hopefully by now you are getting the hang of how to unpack these questions. So here's another 30-mark question. See if you can get ahead of me here. Right, so the question says, definitions do not typically work well to assist us in deciding if a particular object is a member of a category. Okay. Explain how objects are placed into categories. Right, there. That is, if I'm making a mind map, that's the middle of my mind map. How we place objects in categories. Call it categorization. Okay. In reference to, there's one little branch of my mind map, the definitional approach, theory, and the prototype approach, theory. Now, in my mind map, I would make sure that I've got examples attached to each of these, because look at the very last instruction, provide examples to illustrate your answer. Okay. Remember, even in an explain question, you are still providing evidence in the form of facts, theories, studies, experiments, etc. For 30 marks. So think back to how the previous 30-mark question was broken down and see if you can guess what would be in the memo. And this is a really good strategy for you to use as a student. When you read the question, try to guess and imagine what the memo looks like. I'm not talking about the content. I'm talking about the directions to the markers, the instructions to the markers. Give 10 marks here, give 10 marks for that, give 5 marks here. See if you can work it out. Okay, even if if you're not 100% correct and you've guessed 10 marks instead of 15 marks, it doesn't matter. What you are doing cognitively is chunking information. Okay, so it's less overwhelming then to approach this as a whole question, and you are able to break it down into its smallest components and focus in on those so that your answer as a whole is a lot more coherent and detailed and accurate. So here's what is in the memo. Again, theoretical content. So this was a 30-mark question that asked about 2 theoretical approaches. Okay, so there we are seeing that we have 10 marks per theory because it's 20 in total. Okay, let's go back. You had a definitional approach. There's one theoretical component. The prototype approach, another theoretical component. Okay. So you can assume that it's 10 marks for each. So if you left out one of those theories, say, oh gosh, I didn't study definitional approach, but I do remember prototype approach. Don't get disheartened and think, oh, I've bombed on this question already because I don't know definitional approach. There are still 10 marks for prototype approach and still 10 marks for examples. Okay, so if you don't know what definitional approach is, you're likely not to put any good examples there. So let's say you'd get your 10 marks for prototype approach, you'd probably only get 5 marks for examples if you can only remember examples for the prototype approach and not for the definitional approach. Whoops. So our examples, 10 marks were allocated there. Okay, but of course you would only get those 10 marks if you give examples for both approaches, the definitional and the prototype. If you only give examples for one of those approaches, you wouldn't get more than 5 marks. Okay. 10 marks for examples of 2 approaches means 5 marks for each of those approaches in terms of the examples. The content itself around those theories, 10 marks each. So separate also in your mind, separate what you are going to write about the theory of those approaches and what you are going to write about the examples. And be mindful that you are going to get marks separately for theory and examples. So don't try to bulk up what you are writing. So if you are trying to pre-allocate marks for yourself in your mind, and you think, okay, I've made 5 good points here, I should get my 10 marks. If one of those points that you've made is an example, your examiner might rather allocate those marks into this practical example section. So what I'm saying is, of course, use examples to illustrate what you are saying about the theory, but be mindful about the fact that theory is often marked separately from the examples, or the allocation of marks is done separately. Okay. And I'm trying to make that explicit so that you don't accidentally miss out on marks. If you can write about them somewhat separately, to make clear for your examiner that you have put your theoretical points down and you've put down your examples, then that's going to make it much more likely that you get maximum marks there. Okay. So again, in relation to that particular content, if you need to revise that, that's Learning Unit 5, Theme 1, and there are the page numbers for your textbook, 268 to 270. And again, no guarantee this is coming up in the exam that you are writing. This is simply skill building at this point. Let's have a look at the last question. Right. This question, excuse me, is asking you to discuss the history of cognitive psychology. Learning Unit 1. In terms of the following. And there it's nicely broken up for you. 10 marks for discussing Donder's reaction time experiment, and another 10 marks for discussing Ebbinghouse's memory experiment. Okay. So let's again have a look at how marks are broken down. I'm sure by now you can guess. 10 marks, as it was indicated in the question, 10 marks for Donder's, 10 marks for Ebbinghaus. Okay, correct points made. There are not 5 particular points that I want you to give me for Donder's. As long as you are giving me 5 things from Donder's that tell me something about the history of cognitive psychology. That's what we're looking for. So it doesn't even help you for me to show you an example answer, because it could be anything from that experiment that is relevant to the history of psychology. Okay. But again, you can see the mark breakdown there. And there is the Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, early in your textbook, pages 4 to 8. Okay. So, from here, where to? Now we've had a look at this exam, and I really hope that this has helped you to get a much better understanding of how the exam questions are constructed and for what purpose, and how you can then break it down and what the expectations would be of you as a student answering those questions. But now, how do we prepare for what could come up? Because these questions are probably not going to come up. They're not going to repeat the same questions, right? But it might be the same structure. So how do we prepare? I have made reference once or twice in this session to mind maps, because for me, that is the most logical way to organize thinking when there's a couple of complex things that need to be broken down. In your mind, a linear thing might work better with like lists and subheadings, and that is perfectly fine. You do what works for your brain. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips and tricks here. My brain works in mind maps, and so that's what I would do here. I would have a look at my whole module outline, and I would look at all the key theories or the systems that could be asked in a 20, 30 mark question. And I would try to chunk those things together, almost like you are preparing to answer essay questions. That's how I would prepare for this. Have a look at past papers and see how things have been chunked together. And then mind map it in a way that you will be able to recall key facts about theories. Lots of this is rote learning, and that's the nature of cognitive psychology. Because you only have a week, I would 100% use AI to make these mind maps for me. I would give it some content and say, please make a mind map. So even if you have made notes throughout the semester, turn it into a PDF, give it to ChatGPT and say, please make a mind map. And I'm sure there are hundreds of other AI apps that could maybe even do a better one than ChatGPT could. But work smarter, not harder. You don't need to spend the time making the mind map. You need to spend your time learning the mind map. So let AI do the grunt work for you here. Obviously, you must check it against your textbooks, that you make sure that you've got everything that you need. But if AI can do the grunt work for you, even better. I want to just point you to two other things that I have found helpful when I was studying. Okay, it was quite some time ago, and we didn't have AI when I was studying. But if I was studying now, these are two things I would 100% use. Podcasts and an app called Jungle AI. I'm going to show you both of them now. So one thing I did as a student, okay, when I was a student, there wasn't AI, but I'm an auditory learner. And so what I did is I would record myself on my phone, reading out my notes to myself. I would just read it, like it would be like a 20, 30-minute recording of me just reading my notes. And then I would go for a walk and I would listen to myself telling myself what I'd written down in my notes. And for some reason, it's just the way my brain works, that would really stick for me. In the age of AI, we have so many options for us, which is so exciting. I want to show you an app called Notebook LM. You may or may not know it already. And then I'm also going to show you another AI tool called Jungle AI. Because you've only got a week, this is what I would do if I were you. Okay, so let's exit from here. Okay, let me move this. Right, so let me show you Notebook LM first. This is it. It's a Google app. Okay, so if you go into your Google browser and you type in Notebook LM, this is what will pop up. You click here, try Notebook LM. Okay. So what Notebook LM can do for you is it can take a PDF that you give it and it can translate that PDF into a really realistic sounding podcast. If you are a podcast fan like me, this is a wonderful way to digest content. You can listen to it over and over again. You can listen to it while you're walking your dog, while you're fetching your kids from school, while you're on the treadmill, when you're falling asleep, whatever, whatever you need to do. Driving on your way to the exam, this is lovely. So you just hit create new. You give it a source, so like a PDF, or here's all the other options you can give it. I usually give it PDFs, and then it makes a beautiful podcast for you. So it will have two hosts talking about what you've given it. So if you have your notes from this semester in PDF form, give it to Notebook LM. See what it produces for you. It's often incredibly accurate and really just so much more interesting to listen to. If I have to read a really complex paper and I just you know those situations where you just keep reading the same sentence over and over, and I just can't get past it because I'm bored, quite frankly. I pop it into Notebook LM, I let it turn it into a podcast for me, and then I can listen to it, then I can really engage. Yeah, that's very handy. Okay, so there's that option for you, and it's free. Another app that I absolutely love is called Jungle AI. And why I love this is because in most modules, you'll be given lecture slides, which you can download. So what you do with Jungle AI is you upload your slides into Jungle AI that your lecturer has given you. Okay, so let me just go and find some random slides. Sorry, I didn't teach cognitive psychology, so I don't have CogPsych slides, but I do have, no, all my slides there are on Canva. Let's see here, lecture slides. Right, let's give it Learning Unit 1. Okay, it uploads it. This is just a random other module. Don't worry about the content. I'm showing you the application. Okay, so we've given it some slides, which you can download from ARC. Okay, you would just need to continue with your Google account or whatever account you want to work with. Let's just use that one. Okay, now what it's busy doing is it's taken those slides and it's making some questions for me. This is such a lovely revision tool because it does it really accurately as well. So it's busy generating some questions, so we'll just give it a moment. But it makes it into a really fun game. And I want to show you in a moment what it looks like because again, if I was a student right now, I would 100% abuse this app because I like to revise via quizzes. It shows me my own learning gaps. Okay, so it's still going. 48 questions from one learning unit. So this really helps you revise so nicely. Okay, so let's click continue. Okay, let's just skip this. So you can start studying. Right. Now, what it's going to do is on the right-hand side here, it's going to build a little tree. So it's kind of like Hangman. Every time you get a question right, your tree gets bigger and bigger. So if you are motivated with incentive, like I am, this is such a wonderful way to make your brain cooperate with you while you are studying. Okay, so like let's have a look at this. Don't worry about the content again, because this is a different course. The statement, good research starts with good questions, not interesting answer implies that. Which one is it? Process of inquiry and okay, focus on solutions. I'm going to go with A. Right. Did you see my little tree grew? Yay. Okay. And then I keep going. It generated 48 questions for me. This is really, really nice for theoretically heavy modules like cognitive psychology, when there's just a lot and if you get to that point as you think, have I studied enough? Do I know enough about this thing? Have I learned everything I needed to learn? If the slides are comprehensive enough, then this is a wonderful tool for you to be able to revise. So some lecturers don't do lots of slides. Sometimes it's like lots of pictures, but maybe there's a PDF document that your lecturer made for you, or maybe you made it yourself of notes. You can still give that to Jungle AI and, excuse me, it can still generate questions for you. Okay, lovely way to revise. So obviously I won't go through all the questions, but you get the point. Okay, so there are two really handy AI tools for you to use. You may know of more than that, but those are the two that I would really use. Okay, so that brings us to the end of tonight's session. Thank you so much if you've watched to the end. In the next session, I've created a Kahoot of some key concepts and theories that are likely to come up in the exam, given what has already come up. It, of course, may not be accurate, but it's going to be a revision session. So in between this session and the next session, if there are any particular questions around content that you have, please pop them in the chat for this particular meeting. They will still pop up even though the meeting is ended, and I will get back to you before the next session. Good luck with your studying, and I really hope that this helped.